And so, back to Belfast. And my thoughts were as follows: must settle down and stop wandering. Find a job in Northern Ireland where I can put my experience to good use for the benefit of the Northern Irish community and my family. Yes, so that's what we would do. Re-enter the educational system of Northern Ireland after many years of traveling in Africa, South America, Mexico, and the Middle East. It had all been interesting, yes, but I would now do the thing which everyone around me was urging and expecting me to do: re-enter the system. Yes, the party was over. Perhaps I wasn't right, really, about much of this in retrospect, but I was certainly right about the party. We had a small amount of savings from Dubai and a tiny little townhouse in Belfast, where Roger spent his second year in school. His first year was in Dubai. It was great to hear him develop a Belfast accent after the awful English one he had in Dubai. There were many changes and surprises to cope with. Weather, the indoor life, the lack of friends. It was surprisingly difficult to take up where we had left off with my old friends of my youth before we were all married. They were all married now and struggling, like us, to bring up families. And they were surprisingly disinterested in our comings and goings. After a few months, I gave up even talking about our past. This is an experience which was repeated in Australia many years later. No one was interested in our past. Anyway, I eventually began to feel that I had never really left Northern Ireland. It was like waking up with amnesia, having forgotten about 10 years of our life overseas. We didn't see much of my family or friends except for Mum and Dad. My brothers and their wives were often too busy to see us. Of course, Mum and Dad loved seeing the children and Maria especially. But everybody else seemed so busy. Nobody called, and when I called on them, whether it be my brothers or their wives or my old friends, they all looked at me with a "what do you want?" expression on their faces. After a while, I felt as though I was imposing, and so I stopped calling on friends and family. But by far the biggest shock of all was something I had never expected: my inability to get a job. I had never in my wildest dreams thought that at 38 I would not be able to re-enter the system. Surely potential employers would be dropping their jaws in admiration at the boldness of my exploits around the world, and I would have to take the phone off the hook to give myself a break from headmasters hunting me in my little fortress in Belfast. Mr. Nixon, we admire your sense of adventure, your courage, your pioneering spirit, and above all, your dedication to voluntary service. This is just what we need at Belfast Royal Academy, Methodist College, Lagan College, etc. Can you start on Monday? Alas, no. I visited many schools and headmasters, but could not raise a flicker of interest. There was no internet, by the way, in those days. You had to write or phone and try and get a headmaster to meet you face to face. I did get a term's replacement teaching at my old school, Methodist College, in the biology department. That was because my old colleague Donal had been ill, and I was in the right place at the right time. But after Christmas, there was almost nothing. I applied to all the local grammar schools and to some government schools. I managed to get 4 weeks at a Catholic grammar school. Money was running out. Maria was pregnant with a third child. My old friend David got me an interview at Drumore High School, a great government school. The interview, though, was another farce. All my interviews seem to have been farces. Why is that? There were 4 or 5 guys, rural stalwarts of the County Armagh Protestant community. Their questions mostly involved finding out how many workshops I had attended on the latest UK curriculum developments. Naturally, I knew nothing about those, having been in Mexico, Colombia, Dublin, and Africa for most of the time. I didn't get the job. At no stage did these stalwarts show the slightest interest in my dashing exploits in tropical climes. I think they had read my curriculum vitae and decided that it concealed suspicious contacts with Rome. By now, my savings were almost depleted, and we were living on the dole. Even the relief work was drying up. I considered giving up teaching and working in a travel agency. Surely, with all my experience, they would be interested. I made a few inquiries, but nobody was interested. I went for an interview at Randox Chemicals, obtained through a friend of my mother. They weren't interested either, but they didn't say why. Desperate situations require desperate remedies. In desperation, I headed for Gardeners on Botanic Avenue for the Times educational supplement. And there were several jobs I was interested in. One, in a special school for teenagers in the south of England, in Romford, in Essex. One in Papua New Guinea, and one in Australia. I applied to them all. Meanwhile, I had decided to do a postgraduate diploma in teaching English as a foreign language. This must have been my subconscious prompting me. Anyway, this program was the Trinity College London Diploma course, which is a very high-level course, actually. It's the equivalent of another master's degree, basically. It was taught under license, though, in Ireland by Grafton Tuition Centre from London. The lecturers came to Belfast on 2 nights a week for 3 hours for 6 months. The director was a very typical friendly Irishman who had been in Zambia, so we had a lot in common and we were chatting to each other. He was very keen on me doing the course, not surprisingly because of the fees that I was going to pay for it. But anyway, some of the lecturers were, in fact, a little sus, but others were excellent. It was a slightly looser, less professional world than mainstream teaching, but I found the course very interesting, and I knew it would give me the opportunity to teach foreigners in the future someday. Teaching English for me was an insurance policy. In case things went wrong in the mainstream world, which I knew was a distinct possibility. I was rapidly becoming fed up with white Anglo-Saxon culture. In Methody, I had been quite shocked to return for a second term to cheeky students who wouldn't listen to me. When I had taught full-time in Methody 10 years previously, there had been none of that. It used to be a great place to teach, but by 1990 it was different. Some of the relief classes I'd had to teach were appalling. Getting back to the teaching English course Diploma, some of the students were really interesting, actually. But I remember one awful female who kept coming late, not doing her homework, and then slowing down everyone's progress by asking the teacher to go over again what she had, of course, missed. It all came to a head one night when yours truly grabbed the nettle and asked her not to keep interrupting, as we all needed to get on and progress to pass the exam, which was approaching very quickly. It was by no means a cakewalk, the course nor the exam. Of course, I made a mortal enemy of her, and in the final class she had her revenge by showering me in a torrent of abuse, much to everyone's embarrassment. She didn't turn up for the exam, of course, and I scraped through in the end. Pretty proud of myself. I had another farcical interview in Romford, Essex, for a special school for teenagers. I don't understand it, but they seemed uninterested in me from the moment I arrived. Maybe they had contacted my former employers or referees. I don't know. I was glad I didn't get the job in the end. It would not have suited me at all. It was dealing with rich kids with behavioral problems. I don't know why they even wanted to interview me. Perhaps they had phoned my boss in Colombia or Dubai. I remember walking along the streets of Belfast thinking I would do just about anything to have a job. I considered doing a travel agent's course, but it was catch-22. I was underqualified to teach the local Irish, in their eyes anyway, and overqualified for just about everything else. There was nothing for it. I had to go back to Gardener's to get the Times educational supplement. And then one day at about 7 a.m, the phone rang in our little house in Belmont. It was a Yorkshire accent. My first contact from a Yorkshireman in Australia. He seemed very affable and keen to interview me as soon as possible. Fine, I said. Where? In London. Oh, when? I said. Day after tomorrow, he said. Oh, but I wondered, how is he going to get to London from Melbourne so soon? Oh, the chairman of the board will call you today and set up the interview in London. I was so delighted. I didn't ask any more questions. I didn't want to ask too many questions. As usual, I was desperate to get the job. 2 days later, I winged my way to London for the interview with the chairman. The first thing that struck me as curious in London was the casual way in which the chairman of the board was dressed. He greeted me in his very modest London apartment in his dressing gown. I mention this specifically because it was not the only time he did it. A few months later, he did exactly the same thing when we arrived in Melbourne from Ireland. He was in his dressing gown. The next thing that was curious was that there was no sign in the chairman's apartment of the principal from Melbourne. The Yorkshireman, I mean. The guy I talked to on the phone. Well, as usual, the interview was a farce. I took the chairman through my CV in the normal way. Significantly, he stopped me and chattered about my background at Campbell College in Belfast. He had taught at rugby school in England and had received Campbell on some rugby tour. He therefore knew Bob Mitchell, a Devonian, an Englishman, my old housemaster at Campbell. That seemed to be the end of the interview, as far as Nigel was concerned, anyway. After about half an hour, I casually remarked to the chairman about the Yorkshireman's absence, the principal of the school. Oh, him, he said. He's in hospital. Oh, nothing serious, I hope, I said, and then venturing a little humour, not having a nervous breakdown or anything. No, he said. He should be out soon. I always suspected that this was the first little porky pie the chairman told me. I believe that the principal, the Yorkshireman, was actually in hospital at that time, suffering from a nervous breakdown and mental exhaustion. The chairman seemed to want to talk more about the owner of the school, who was fondly referred to by his employees as the blowfly, in honour of his management style. The blowfly in Australia is famous for arriving unexpectedly and uninvited, quite suddenly and abruptly to an unwanted part of your body, such as the lips. I never could work out how much the chairman really knew about the blowfly, or what he was really like at this stage. I remember asking him the question at the interview towards the end. As the blowfly was the owner of the school and had just moved on to the school premises with his wife, alarm bells were ringing. So I asked the chairman, what were the blowfly and his wife really like? I knew this was the crucial question. Well, I don't really know, said the chairman, but the blowfly and his wife seemed to me to be an uncommonly decent couple. Well, fatally reassured by this assessment, I was hooked. I took the job and the bait, hook, line, and sinker. After all, how could a chap from rugby school be wrong? The Campbell rugger team had, after all, toured the school with my housemaster. Before I'd arrived back in Belfast, the chairman had phoned my wife Maria and offered me the job. The chairman had obviously been impressed by me. Could I say no? Of course not. The die was well and truly cast for the next chapter in the Nixon saga. Australia. Big Brother had his Australian contacts investigate the school, and their assessment was not good. Financially unstable was the verdict. Well, thanks, Roger, Big Brother, but so am I thought. I've been on the dole now for 6 months and my savings have gone. What else could we do? I've been trying to get a job for 10 months in Ireland with no success. No one was interested. We were off to Australia. It was the 1st of July, 1990.